Chapter 1162, Prophecy. Jayaman Sparrow has gone missing. Bernadette had a vague sense of foreboding when the abnormally terrifying messenger returned. She had roughly figured out what had happened. Therefore, after hearing the other party's response, her expression sank slightly. There was no obvious reaction. Queen Mystic's blue eyes, which resembled a condensing sea, instantly turned darker. They temporarily lost focus, as though she was looking at a torrent of fate through Rionette Tinecare. 2 to 3 seconds later, Bernadette suddenly closed her eyes, as if a blinding light had appeared in front of her. Blood-red liquid trickled from the corner of her eyes, accentuating her pale face. With her eyes tightly shut, Bernadette said in a slightly ethereal voice, "Jayaman Sparrow is in grave danger. Darkness is devouring the light, leaving behind only a sliver of hope." This was a prophecy. The sequence 3 of the mystery prior pathway was clairvoyant. The 4 heads held by Rionette Tinecare spoke one after another. What does darkness symbolize? Bernadette maintained her composure and said, "Desolation, aberration, apocalypse, negativity, error." Rionette Tinecare, who was wearing a dark and complicated long dress, didn't let the head in her hand speak any further. Throwing down the letter and gold coin, she turned and walked into the void, disappearing into the room. Queen Mystic Bernadette stood rooted to the ground for a few seconds without moving. Finally, she opened her eyes again. Her blue eyes were hazy and lifeless, as though she needed more time to restore her eyesight. Bernadette thought for a moment and reached out her right hand. The tablecloth was stowed away before being spread open once again. The ritual items were replaced with a fountain pen, paper, and ink bottle. The fountain pen suddenly leaped up, as if it was held by an invisible sprite. It quickly wrote down the matter of Jayaman Sparrow's disappearance onto the paper. In the captain's cabin of the future. Despite looking at the fried mushrooms on her plate and taking in the fragrance of the fat, Katlia didn't pick up her cutlery for a long time. Suddenly, her spiritual perception was triggered. She turned her head to look at the spot where the brass sextant was placed, and she realized that a letter had appeared there at some point in time. Katlia immediately revealed a smile as she reached out to pick up the letter and eagerly began reading it. Gradually, she frowned. "Jayaman Sparrow has gone missing." Katlia repeated the key point of the letter in a low voice. She acutely felt that this matter was somewhat serious. She easily understood the meaning behind Queen Mystic's letter. Without any hesitation, she bowed her head, clasped her hands, and recited an honorific name in ancient Hermes. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." Above the gray fog, the crimson star representing the hermit came alive. It began expanding and contracting, spreading out ripples of prayers. They intertwined with the ripples created by the 2 crimson stars that corresponded to the magician and the sun. They surged towards the ancient and majestic palace, like tidal waves. Someone is praying to Mr. Fool again. The echoes are getting even stronger, and the sound is becoming more clear. I can hear it clearly, and the image is also clearer. This prayer seems to be from Ma'am Hermit, only she likes to wear ancient warlock robes. Queen Mystic discovered that something has happened to Jayaman Sparrow. Although I was worried that I would die this time and needed a certain amount of time to revive, I had already hinted to the members of the Tarot Club that I might cancel the gathering next week, but that was just a hint. It wasn't a formal notice, nor was it clear enough. When Monday comes, they'll definitely panic, pray, and try to make contact, only to discover that Mr. Fool has also disappeared. No, he has run off with the world. Klein used a deprecating comment to ease his feelings. He glanced at Ammon, who was walking beside him. Without a word, he lifted the lantern in his hand and said, "It should have been extinguished long ago." Wearing a pointed hat and black mage robe, Ammon nodded slightly and said, "I left it in a magical state. It can maintain its light for a week without needing any fuel." Klein thought for a moment and asked, "Is this the deceiving of natural laws?" Ammon turned his head and used his monocled right eye to look at Klein for a second before smiling. "Smart." The Error Pathways Sequence 3 is a more profound version of Swindler, known as Mentor of Deceit. It's about the same as my guess. However, it isn't only the Error Pathway that can do such a thing. The Black Emperor can use distortion and exploit powers to achieve that. In his mind, Klein began comparing the differences between the marauder and the lawyer pathway. At this moment, Ammon stroked his chin and asked with interest, "There are less than 3 days left. If you don't think of a way to escape, it will be too late. Do you plan on making a new attempt tomorrow?" "Make a guess." Klein forced a smile as he answered in the same rhetoric manner that Ammon was best at using. To be honest, he didn't believe that the effects would be better given more attempts. On the one hand, frequent attempts were indeed able to test the limits of Ammon's powers. By expending the items that he had previously stolen, Klein could establish a good foundation for the final battle. But on the other hand, he would also expose his trump cards. After all, he was in a passive state and had no chance to prepare. To force Ammon to showcase more of the means available to him, it required him to use the few trump cards he had. If his countermeasures were all figured out by Ammon after his repeated attempts, he wouldn't have any chance of escaping. An attempt to escape was a double-edged sword. If one wasn't careful, one would cut oneself. It was precisely because of this that Klein didn't blindly take action and carefully made plans in his heart. As he spoke, he walked out of the city that originally worshipped the mutant king and later believed in the ancient sun god. There were only white bones and several stone structures that had been weathered by the elements here that showcased its former prosperity. Outside the city, there was an endless wilderness that couldn't be seen in the lightning. At 7 Pinster Street, Leonard sat on a sofa. He placed his feet on the coffee table and leisurely flipped through the day's newspaper. Yesterday, George III's death had brought them copious amounts of work. He had spent the entire night on duty, and he received 5 hours of rest today. After sleeping for 2 hours, Leonard woke up in high spirits, attempting to understand the current situation from the normal media. In fact, as the captain of a Red Gloves team, he knew more than the reporters about certain aspects. For example, in the outskirts of Backland, where the Tudor ruin was located, it had collapsed into a rather large lake. It had nearly affected Dwayne Dance's Mager Manor. Another was the death of George III, who had self-destructed at the square, but wasn't the actual person. The search for his corpse was to no avail, as though he had vanished into thin air that night. Of course, Leonard was extremely certain that George III was already dead. The eldest prince was about to inherit the title of Balam Emperor and Lone King. Back then, something had happened at Sephra Castle. This matter definitely has something to do with Mr. Fool. Klein had long warned us about George III. The reactions of the 3 churches were very strange. Even the Church of the Lord of Storms, which is most prone to acting rash, wasn't too angry. As Leonard flipped through the newspaper, his thoughts wandered casually. At this moment, his mind was filled with the slightly aged voice of Pallas Zarost. "J.M. Sparrow's messenger is here." Leonard suddenly looked up and saw the angel-level messenger wearing a dark and complicated long dress appear in front of him. The 4 blonde, red-eyed heads held by Rionette Tynecare spoke one after another. "J.M. Sparrow has encountered extreme danger. He has gone missing." Klein has encountered danger and disappeared. Leonard immediately retracted his legs and stood up. Without waiting for the reminder provided by Pallas Zarost, his spiritual perception stirred as he blurted out, "Is it related to the death of George III?" Yes, he destroyed the apotheosis ritual of George III. The 8 red eyes on Rionette Tynecare's foreheads looked at Leonard. Apotheosis ritual. Although Leonard was anxious, he was still shocked by the phrase. For someone to hold an apotheosis ritual, one had to be a Sequence 1 angel at the very least. Yet, Klein was able to directly participate in something at that level. Mr. Fool's plan? Leonard's green eyes glimmered slightly. Relying on his relatively rich experience, he pointedly asked, "What happened to Klein the last time you saw him?" The 4 blonde, red-eyed heads of Rionette Tynecare shook and said, "Possibly, under Zeratul S. pursuit." As J.M. Sparrow's messenger, this ancient Bane was able to sense that her employer had also left the Tudor ruins after escaping. And as for those who understood the means of a scholar of yore, they were undoubtedly high-sequence beyonders of the same pathway. Therefore, Zeratul would definitely be able to obstruct and pursue him. Zeratul, the leader of the secret order, the Sequence 1 angel Zeratul. As Leonard was worried about Klein, he felt fear and concern for the life of his former colleague. At that moment, a deep voice sounded in his mind. Ask her what other clues she has. Leonard immediately did as he was asked. Rionette Tynecare seemed to know that Leonard wasn't simple. She repeated Queen Mystic's prophecy word by word. After listening to what was said, Pallas Zoroast fell silent for a while before sighing. Error. I think I know about your former colleague's current situation. Leonard subconsciously wanted to ask, but because there were outsiders around, he held back his urge. Pallas paused and continued. The anomaly with Sephra Castle attracted Zeratul. How could Ammon not notice it? This should be related to the struggle for Sephra Castle. Sephra Castle? Leonard slowly took a deep breath and said to Rionette Tynecare, he might have fallen into the hands of Ammon. After Miss Messenger's 4 heads nodded and turned to leave, Leonard immediately sat down and clasped his hands. Closing his eyes, he prayed. The fool that doesn't belong to this era.